Welcome back to the Sports Desk on SYN 90.7 FM. You are joined by Michael, Kendra, and James. And yet again, we have a very exciting special guest from the RMIT Elite Athletes program. It is our very highly talented Wildwater canoer, Thomas Elms. Tom, welcome to the show today.
Yeah, no worries, guys. Great to be here.
Fantastic, Tom. And it is a pleasure to talk to someone who is in the water sport program. And for all of those out there who may be unaware of the adrenaline pumping sport, which is wildwater canoeing, can you summarize the sport for us? Some of its origins and a basic washdown, pardon the pun, of the rules and how one is victorious in the sport.
Yeah, awesome. So the whole idea behind wildwater canoeing or wildwater kayaking, which is what I specialize in, is we're trying to get down a section of river in the fastest time we possibly can. So the sport originated in France in the 1950s, and that's where the event's been going on pretty much every 2 years since then. So the whole idea is that we are trying to race through a section of whitewater, so rapids ranging between class 2 to class 4. And it's the fastest time, that we can possibly get down the course. And there's two different types. There's the classic race, which is anywhere from about 10 to 60 minutes, which is usually somewhere in the range of 3 to even up to 10 kilometers. And then there's the sprint, which is over a 200 to 600 meter course, which usually involves the biggest sections of whitewater on a river. So you're looking at that class 3 plus class 4 whitewater, and that's usually about 60 seconds.
With the whitewater, is that the main obstacle that you have, or is it one of those sports where there are actually physical cones that you have to maneuver your boat around in order to get to the final parts of the course?
Yeah, definitely. So wildwater canoeing is it's just the whitewater you're trying to navigate through. Wildwater slalom or slalom canoeing is the type of kayaking with gates and poles that you have to navigate through as well as the whitewater. And that's where slalom canoeing is the Olympic sport. And we have some very, very strong paddlers in the slalom, which I've also competed in a little bit as well. But yeah, so in wildwater, you're just trying to pick the fastest line through the section of rapids that you possibly can, regardless of whatever's in the way. Your goal is just to try and get from the top to the bottom as quickly as you possibly can.
And when they say wildwater, Tom, are we expecting each terrain to be quite different from the other one that you compete in?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's an old saying, it's from a Greek philosopher, and it says, no man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he's not the same man. And that's absolutely true when it comes to wildwater racing, because it's just, the river's so variable. You know, there might be new trees or new rocks that have moved in the river. And then the river level itself is so highly variable that every time you're going there, it's a super duper dynamic kind of field. Yeah, it's just amazing.
Wow. And while we're on the topic, what has been one of the most impressive or potentially the most scariest courses that you've actually been on?
So the most impressive course that I've paddled is on the Mersey River down in Tasmania. And there's a big difference between natural courses, which are ones that haven't had man-made interference. And the Mersey is one of those. So it's just stunning scenery. You're in this deep gorge and there's just continuous whitewater throughout the whole section. It's just amazing. But the most intimidating course that I've paddled on is up at the Olympic Slalom Stadium in Penrith, which is continuous class 3 water. But because the channel is so narrow, the length of the boats that we're paddling is so long, the margin for error is really small. The risk of kind of breaking boats and breaking yourself is a lot higher. So yeah, it's really, really cool.
What inspired you to get involved with wildwater canoeing as a profession?
I used to swim competitively, sort of late primary school, early high school. And I got to a point where the time commitments and stuff that they were asking me to put in, I wasn't prepared to do. And so I kind of stopped doing that because I fell out of love with the sport. And kind of when I was in between sports, my father used to race in wildwater canoeing back through the late 70s and 80s. And so he had a couple boats in the shed and he was retired at that point. And he's kind of said, well, let's give this thing a go. We actually started playing canoe polo, which is another form of kayaking. And then we eventually moved into slalom and then onto whitewater. But yeah, it was my father that inspired me. He's the one that kind of started it. I guess you could say it runs in the family, but yeah.
What does the RMIT Elite Athletes program do to ensure that you can participate in as many wild water canoeing competitions that you can, whilst also balancing up a heavy study load?
Yeah. So the program's been really, really supportive. I've just recently sorted out my gym access. So when you're a part of the program, you get access to gyms and facilities, and I believe even trainers and stuff, which is really, really useful because it's really convenient when you're on campus to be able to use the facilities. And not only that, but it's really, there's a financial pressure when you're trying to compete as well as study. And so being able to use, these amazing gyms and these amazing facilities without having to pay for it is pretty cool, actually.
Can you elaborate on the competitions that you have planned for 2021? And is there maybe a burning ambition for an Olympic debut in the future?
Yeah, so unfortunately, wildwater canoeing is not an Olympic sport, or at least not yet anyway. So that's where slalom canoeing is, which I've done a little bit of. But wildwater, yeah, it's not an Olympic sport. So through 2020, that was kind of my big competition year. We got within 2 weeks of traveling to the United States to compete in the World Championships and the World Cup races over there. So that would have been West Virginia and North Carolina, some really cool rivers over there. But then since that, there haven't really been many races. The next big one is the National Championships, which is happening on the Big River in August. But that's subject to change because obviously with wildwater racing, we're so dependent on rainfall. And if you don't get rain falling consistently in the right spots and at the right times, you don't have any water to paddle on. So it's really difficult to kind of plan events this far in advance unless the courses are fed through dam release. So the Big River, it's just going to be a case of waiting and seeing how much rain we're going to get.
If we all want to pick up an oar and begin wild water canoeing tomorrow, what are some of the very basic tips we should know about and potentially some of the equipment that we should invest in for the sport?
Yeah, definitely. So there's so many different types of paddling. It really depends on what you're looking to get out of it. Whether you're looking at going into whitewater or whether you're looking at fitness, kind of marathon or distance stuff. But when you're going for a paddle, one of the most important things you've got to consider is that it is a pretty dangerous sport. There's lots of things that can go wrong, especially in a whitewater setting. One of the best rules to kind of follow is never paddle alone. That doesn't necessarily mean never paddle without someone on the water, but you want to have someone with you so that if something does go wrong, they can kind of pull you out of the water. Yeah, prepare, take someone with you, or at least let someone know where you're going and know your limits as well.
Tell us a little bit about capsizing because it does happen in the sport. What are some good techniques that you've learned over the years about how to get out of a situation like that?
Capsizing is really interesting because at the end of the day, you've got to try not to. The best, you've got to try not to come out of the boat. That's where we learn how to do what's called an Eskimo roll or a kayak roll, which is where we use our paddle or even our hands to actually right the boat with us still in it. Especially in a whitewater setting, your kind of last resort is to exit the boat because swimming down a section of rapids is so much more dangerous than staying in the boat and kind of floating down through them. Rolling is a very useful skill to have, and it's not something that can be learned overnight, but especially if you want to start paddling some higher grades of whitewater, it's a tool that is very, very useful. My father has a saying that goes, there are two types of paddlers. There's paddlers who are about to fall in, and there's paddlers who have fallen in. So falling out's a part of it, but you're just trying to minimize the risk all the time. And just like anything, it's just practice.
What is the craziest wildwater canoeing story you have for us? So either it could be from a competition or something casual.
Just recently, my father, we went up to the King River, which was in flood at the time. And there's a rapid called the Weir Rapid. And when the water comes up, it forms a really, really nasty hole or a stopper where the water folds back on itself. And he's paddled up to it with not a lot of speed, and he's gone into it, and the tail of the boat has gotten retained in the stopper. And the boat has basically stood up on its end. And these boats are about 4.5 meters long. So it is just stood up straight in the air. With him trying to control it as best he can. And it was just so strange. Look, it looked like a totem pole with him in the middle sticking out of the river. And it was just one of those things. I wish I had my GoPro with me at the time. It was just something so amazing and yeah, just so unexpected, really. It was pretty cool.
Thomas Elms, thank you so, so much for joining us on the Sports Desk today, taking us through the incredible sport of wild water canoeing. And you've certainly inspired Kendra, James, and I to get in a boat and give it a go. Thank you so much for joining us today.
No worries, guys. Thanks for having me.